eventually we're going to bring the fish back into Maya, and he'll be nice and neat and he'll look wonderful. And then we need to actually go through the rigging process of making him move. There's a bunch of different ways we could rig something to get it to move. There's a bunch of different things that we can set up and to get that whole mess to happen. So on the rigging menu here, this is a part of the rigging stuff. So like all the stuff that you're seeing under all these menus is different ways that all items can get rigged. If you look at a full-blown final finished character, a lot of them have a good selection of these things that they've used throughout. The way we're using the fish is we're using deformers, okay? And so with deformers, and I've kind of gone through these before, but just to quickly review them, come on. We need, for anything that we're gonna animate as far as deform, we need to have divisions. So on this, if I were to go under my deform nonlinear and I added a bend deformer, under the curvature here, you can see this isn't really going to bend at all because there's no divisions to it, so it's not going to bend. So I need to make sure that whatever I deform has enough divisions. Now there is an area where there could be some overkill. So right now I have 29 divisions. If I tripled that or quadrupled that or went crazy and had 700 divisions, this thing could go from very manageable to completely ridiculous. I hate animation class because this is so horrible. So if I set this to 15 and I duplicate it and set it over here, and then I take this and I set it to 150, and I set that there, and then I take this one and I set it to 1500, and then I duplicate it and set it there, okay? In this example, maybe it won't be as apparent, but we should see a definite difference in how fast this is going to work. So I'm going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to add a bend to this, and you can see how interactive it is. That's the biggest thing anytime we rig anything, interactivity. We shouldn't get any slowdowns. As I'm doing this, see how quick that's going. I want it to be really small. I want it big. Very quick, okay? Let me go to the next one. I'll do the same thing. So I added a bend. Okay, still pretty quick. Let's go to this one. We'll add a bend. Okay, still not too bad. So let's go crazier. Holy cow. Maya just said no. Yep. Maya said I don't think so. Let's go to this and we'll put this up to 200. There we go, and we'll duplicate that and bring it over here. And we'll go to nonlinear and we'll say bend. Okay, now look at that. Okay, there's definitely an area that we've crossed over into this being functional, into this being annoying. Okay, on your fish, yes, you're probably not going to have a 1 million division fish, but it is very possible that you could have a fish that is past that point of being workable. Okay, remember I showed you we have one fish that we're going to rig, and then we're going to duplicate it and have 1,000 fish or however many. That would get unworkable if we did that. If you have one fish that's 10,000 and you duplicate it 10 times, now it's 100,000. You duplicate it 100 times, then it's 1,000,000. And all of the fish are trying to animate, so your system goes super slow. Okay? So we don't want this kind of thing. We definitely don't want that, especially when it's not necessary. Just for fun, how tiny those things are. So you don't want that kind of stuff. Okay? So now, once we have this kind of set up, let me just set that back to 10. Ideally, stuff like this, like see how many divisions this has? If I were just to duplicate that one and I added that same nonlinear bend to it, and I bent it. Okay, there's obviously a definite difference in what these two look like, but if I were to hit 3 on both of these, you can see that there's not a difference in either one, or a very subtle difference. Okay? So this one being only 3,000 polygons and this one being 10,000, there's not a huge difference in what we're looking at. All right, so just be aware that you don't want to take your fish and smooth them out ever. Okay, you want to keep, just like in mine, a very loose polygon mesh over the entire thing. If you smooth him, it's just going to cause everything to come to a grinding halt. Especially when we try to animate and whatever else. All right, so let's say for this thing, I don't want to come over here and I don't want to grab this curvature and have to do that, okay? What I want to do is I want this whole process here to be automatic. I also don't want it to go like that from both sides. Let's pretend this is the fish's tail. I'm going to set the bottom one to off, and all I want is this to happen, okay? So I'm going to make an expression that's going to automatically do all of that for me. So I'm going to click on curvature, and I'm going to go to edit and say expression. And just so you can see it, I'm going to make this bigger. I'm going to type some stuff and then zoom in so you can see it. There we go. Okay. So the way that expressions work is we have to tell Maya what is the object we're writing an expression for, what is the item we're writing the expression for, and then what do we want to do, okay? So the object is our bend 2, the item is the curvature, okay? And I got that name from this here. If any one of these is spelled incorrectly, it will not work. If I put a capital where there's no capital, a space where there's no space, whatever, it won't work. It has to be exactly like you see it here. So if you know Control C, which is copy, and Control V, which is paste, use those. I just enjoy the practice, so I just typed it in. Okay, so bend2.curvature equals, and then what do we want it to equal? We just put a number, 5. Okay, I hit create. My system did not give me a red error at the bottom here. That means that my expression was valid. It says expression 1 result, so that means that it worked. And if we look over here, what's that?
It also did it.
Right, and if we look over here, it says curvature 5. So it actually did set my curvature to 5. If I set it to 10, edit, now it's 10. Okay, so not a huge deal, but again, we want to automate this thing. We want to just go back and forth. So we're going to call out a little bit of math, and I know it's 8:30 at night, but we're going to call out math a little bit. Okay. So in math, there's a function called sine wave. Okay, I don't know if you remember this from years ago when you were sleeping or trying to sleep and the teacher was talking about these things. But it's essentially this. Okay, it's going to go up, it's going to go down, and it's going to cycle like that forever. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use this as a way to control this curvature thing. So I'm going to say in here that the curvature is going to equal the sine of something. You have to have it equal the sine of some number here. So if I did the sine of 10, let's say, it would be negative 0.544. Now that doesn't mean anything to us. It's going to be 544 forever. It's not going to do anything different. But if I change the 10 to something like time, what it's going to do is it's going to read whatever time I'm at on my timeline and use that as a number that's constantly changing. Okay? So if I just scoot that off frame and I bring back my elements here, there we go, close that, close that. All right, so now if I hit play, you can see very, very subtly that the tip of this is moving. Okay, so it's going like that, very, very slow. Now what the sine wave does is it ranges from -1 to +1, -1 to +1. So just like a grandfather clock, back and forth. So what I want to do is make that value more. So instead of this going here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say do the sine of time, but then whatever you get after it, multiply it by like 5. Okay? So instead of it going from -1 to 1, what do you think it'll go to? -5 to 5. Okay? So that'll be our range. I hit edit, scoot that over there, hit play. Let me give myself some more frames so we can actually see this. There we go. So now we're going -5 to 5. Again, not a huge distance, so maybe we'll make it even more. And this is the part of rigging that once it works and you've typed it in and you know, okay, now I'm just tweaking. This is actually like the fun part of this, is it's just a matter of what values do I want here.
103.
Yeah, Maya will say no. All right, there we go. So there's 20 and -20. So maybe that's a good value, maybe it isn't, maybe I want to tweak that, whatever, okay? So that's going to be the part that we eventually will begin playing with. So let me shrink this down a smidge. There we go. All right, so bend2.curvature equals sine of time times 20. All right, so negative 20 to positive 20. Now, what if I want this to go faster? What if it's going too slow? And instead of time, I can make this frame. Okay, so time is every 30 frames is 1. Okay, because I'm at 30 frames a second. So 30 is 1, 60 is 2, 90 is 3. With it set to frame, it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So what should happen is this thing should go crazy. There it goes. Okay, so maybe a happy medium, right? So if I stop this, and let's say I take frame divided by 30. Okay, frame divided by 30 is exactly time. Okay, so it's the same thing. So I'll do frame divided by 10. So that'll be a third faster. There we go. So that happens a little bit quicker. Okay, I could also do frame divided by 5, and it'll go a little bit slower or faster. Frame divided by 20, and it'll go slower. Okay, so it's not necessary for you to know exactly what sine does. All we need to know is that it'll go from -1 to 1, and we need to punch in frame here and this here. And everything that's inside the parenthesis controls how fast it's going to move. Everything outside the parenthesis over here is going to control the range that it's moving. Okay, so just for fun, let's set that to 50. Okay. Now it might seem like if I put this at 100 that it actually is going faster. It's not. It's just traveling a bigger distance within the same amount of time. Okay, so you may need to tweak some of the values. All right, so that's one way that we can control this kind of stuff. Now let's say that I don't want to, as an animator, I'm going to close this. As an animator, I may not want this thing always going, right? What if I want to set keyframes on that? There's no way to set keyframes on an actual expression. I can't edit the expression and set keyframes on it. It's impossible to do. But what I can do is I can make attributes outside of that that I can use as reference. Okay, so I'm going to create a locator, and a locator is simply just a dummy object just sitting out here in the middle of space. And what I can do with it is I can add stuff to this and then assign it to different properties. So if I go to modify, add attribute, and I'm going to do 2. I'm going to call this one fin whatever wag speed, and I'll just hit add, and I'll say fin wag distance, and I'll hit add. All right, so I have these two here that just got added to this right side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click back on this, go back to my curvature, go back to the expression. It pulls it back up. Another way to do that, if I had this clicked off, you see my expression goes away. If I go up to the filter and I say, hey, show me all the expressions, there it is, and there it is. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use, instead of this 20 here and instead of the 100 here, I'm going to use these properties. Okay. So if I grab this and I rename this to be fin controller, and I just call this, I'm going to say fin controller dot fin wag speed. Hit edit. I've typed it wrong. I didn't have spaces. Oh, there you go. It says division by 0. I don't know what I'm doing. It doesn't like this being a 0 here, so I'll set that to 1, and then I'll hit edit. Okay, so some of the rules of math still apply. So then the other one, I'm going to put fin controller dot fin wag distance. That's why naming your stuff kind of consistently really helps, because I know how I've named my items. So when I type them in, it automatically works because I know what I've typed in. Now, these here are capitals with spaces, capitals with spaces. This is showing what's called nice naming. It's not the actual thing I called it, it's just nice naming. If I go to edit, channel names, and set this to long, it'll show me the actual thing that I typed in that I need to type in order for this expression to work. So once I hit edit here and I close this, hit play, you'll see that nothing happens. Nothing's happening because my wag distance is set to 0. So I've told it to go from 0 to 0. There's no movement. I'll set it to go to 30, 10, 5, 1. Now you'll see that it's going very quickly because my speed is set to 1, right? So I need to lower that or raise that. So 5, 10, 20. Okay, so now you can see how outside of the expression editor, I can control all of this stuff. Okay, so if I am animating this, I can animate this thing starting at, let's say it starts at 20. So I can key that. And then at 140, it goes to 0. Oops, it can't go to 0. It goes to 0.0001. And I'll key that. Just didn't like that at all. Oh, right, I'm going the opposite way. There we go. We're going to 60,000. I could have also just done the distance. That probably would have been smarter of me. Break this connection. Just leave that at 20. There we go. Good. So let's set this to 50 here. And then we'll go up a bit and set that to 0. There we go. So you can see how I gradually got that to stop that expression. Okay? So all the stuff that we're going to do is going to be exactly like that. How do we have this controller, and then how do we control that item? Okay? Now, in your animation setup, it's nice to have one spot, especially for something like the fish, where we can just go there and get a list of all the items we can edit, and then tweak all those items individually. As opposed to, I want to grab the hand and move it here, and I want to grab this hand and move it there. I want to grab this shoulder and move it there. All of these different things, it becomes cumbersome to have to grab all these individual pieces, especially on the fish. It's pretty good. Okay, so let's say we had another control that we wanted to add to this specific item, like, let's say, where's my nonlinear? Let's say I wanted to flare this. All right, so I'm going to flare the bottom of that. Yeah, we'll flare the bottom, okay? So on this one, I have two attributes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my expression editor, and I'm going to say flare1.start flare x is going to be equal to flare1.start flare z, okay? When I do something like this, it automatically just puts it equal to that item. That way I don't have to write two expressions, one for x and one for z. I write one expression and they all just tie to that same one. Okay, so now I can put flare1.start flare z equals the sign of time times 10. Okay, so same thing. It's going to go kind of slow because we're doing the sign of time. And because we're doing it times 10, it's going to go -10 to +10. Now notice what happened over here. I hit edit, my start flare x is at 1 and my start flare z is at -7. So what happened there? Why is one of them different than the other?
Did you set them to be the same before the thing changed?
Yes. So the first line, I set them to be equal, but then the second line I changed z. Okay, so it matters what order these things are in to get it to work correctly. So I'm just going to cut this expression, paste it up here, and then end each line with a semicolon. So now they're both -7.058. Set this over here. All right, so now we'll watch this. It'll go crazy. Okay, so the top is wiggling, and then the bottom is flaring out. But what it's also doing is it's flaring out, but then going inside itself. Okay, so it's actually like crossing into it, like you can see it right there. See how thin that area got? So I can use other expressions to control the fact that I don't want it to do that. Okay, so another one, I'm just going to put parentheses around this. And I'm just going to put abs. Abs means absolute, meaning positive number. So it'll only give me back a positive number. So if I hit edit, it won't go into the negatives, which is why it was doing that. And so now you'll see that it's only going in the positive direction. It's kind of dancing. Okay, so now we have this 10 here. We have this time value. Let's say time times 10. That's too much. 2. There we go. All right, so now we have these two values I want to write an expression for. So I'm going to go to, close that, grab my locator. I'm going to go to modify add attribute, and I'm going to call it flare speed. And I'll call the other one flare distance. Okay. And then the same thing I did, I'm going to click on my flare and go to my expression. And you'll see here, this is the flares expression. It's kind of sucky that I'm editing the flares expression without seeing the other expressions there. It helps, again, to have all of our expressions kind of one right after the other. So I'm going to cut these out of here with Control X. I'm going to delete my expression, change this to see all of them, and then I can just semicolon this, paste it right there. Okay, so now I can go in here and just type in the exact same thing that I need. Oops. This would be fin controller dot flare speed times fin controller dot flare distance. Aha. All right, so now if we look at this thing here, I can say the speed is 1 and the flare distance is 2. There we go. And the flare distance is 5. Okay, so all the stuff we do is this exact same way. Create a controller, and then we control different items with it. And now I have basically one item so far, and I can control multiple attributes on this item. If I need that speed to go faster for the wagging, oops, I do that. If I need it to go slower, I slow that down. If I need this to go faster, I speed that up. If I need this distance to go lower, okay? So there's lots of stuff that we can do with this. Now expressions is one way that we would edit this kind of thing. The other way we can edit stuff is using the general editors, and it's called the connection editor. Okay, so I'm just going to set that off to the side for now. And I'm just going to create a couple objects just so we can see how this works. I'll just create one object for now. Okay, so let's say that every time I moved, every time I moved this up, I wanted the Y to also scale. Okay, I don't know why I want that, I just do. So I'm going to load that item in my left and right. Okay, and I'm going to find inside here the translate. So here's my translate. And I want to say the translate Y, which is the movement up, is going to be connected to the scale Y. So what that means is that as I move this up, you can see how the scale of this is also being affected. Okay? I can just, and there's no magic trick to clicking these, it's just like click, click, and it works. I'm going to set this to the scale X and Z. So now you can see as I move this, it's actually controlling the X and the Z. Turn those off. Maybe I'll just have it do the X. Or maybe I'll have it do just the Z. Maybe I'll have it rotate. So I'll go to rotate and say rotate in the X direction. Okay. Now, because what it's doing is a one-to-one relationship, meaning as I move this up 1 unit, it's rotating it 1 unit, there's not a huge amount of movement happening here, right? Because a sphere will rotate 90 degrees and it's only going like that far. I'd have to move this up 90 units in order to see a big movement like that. So where we do expressions, that's where it becomes a little bit more easy to kind of tie things together, because we can just say this Y movement is going to be equal to 90 times of that, okay? Now the other way we can do this is we can add other stuff into the mix. So in the Hypershade, rendering editors, Hypershade, there's a bunch of utilities inside here, and you may not have ever seen them or paid attention to them, but all of these utilities here are things where you can use them for expression controls along with material stuff. So one of them is a multiply, and what it's going to do is I'm going to bring in all my objects. So here is this multiply. I'm going to go to my outliner. Where's my outliner? I'm going to drag my sphere in here. Come on. All right, I'm going to click on the sphere, click on the multiply divide. I'm going to hit this button. Come on, where are you? Just show up. I'm going to go to my node editor. I don't know why that's not working. That should be working. So in my node editor, which is essentially what we're looking at here, I need my multiply divide node browser. There we go. So I just dropped the multiply divide node in here, and here is my p-sphere. So with this, what I can do is I'm just going to double click this little bar. See how it opens up all that stuff? I can double click this bar, and it opens up more stuff. And I'm going to say that my translate information is going to go into the input 1. And then the output information is going to go into my output information is going to go into rotation. There we go. Okay, so it might be hard to see, but that's what it's doing. So as I look at that multiply now, it's taking all of this movement, multiplying it times 1, and then sending it over to the rotates. There we go. So now if we look at it, it looks kind of like wonky because all of those are tied together. And as I move it, it's going to update all of these things. So as I drag it this way, you can see how it's rotating more. If I go to the multiply and I say, let's see, 0 here, 0 there, and set that one to 60. All right, so now everything in the X, as I move it, you can see how this is now spinning in the X direction. Now I could tie different things together. So I could actually tie the X movement with Z rotation, and that way it'll actually look like it's rolling with us. The way that it's set up in here is it's taking all of the translates in there. Okay, so let me just pull these off. So if I went to the translate X and I went to input 1, there we go, and I took the output of input 1 and I put it onto rotate Z, there we go. And let me reset the other rotation. Come on. What it should be happening is it should be rotating. It's not rotating at all. Oh, there it goes. It's going really slow for some reason. Let's do 500. It's not playing nice. Let me make sure this is correct. So I'm taking the translate X, input 1. Oops, that's what I did wrong. Maybe. This one, going to rotate Z. Well, it was working a second ago. It's just stupid now. Okay? And that's one of the fun things about Maya.
So actually it works.
And now it is working. I closed it. And now it's not working. No, it is. It's just working really slow. I'm not sure why it's working so slow, because it should be taking this number, multiplying it, and then giving us that negative number. Whatever. All right. So that's one way that we could do it using this connection editor. Sometimes it's kind of flaky, obviously. The other way to do it, when you have something that's a bit more complex, is something called the set driven. Okay? So the expression is good if you have a specific math connection. This is connected to this mathematically. We can set up that connection. But sometimes it's not like that. Sometimes we have to set up something that's a little bit more organic in what it's going to be doing. So, or it's very, as far as the instructions are very complex. Okay? So let's say that as this thing moves up, when it goes here, I want it to be flat like this, but then when it comes up like this, I want it to be scaled in like that. Okay, and so that's obviously a very difficult expression to write. Like, how would we even start with something like that? But with set driven, we can do that kind of thing. So under, I just go here. It's the easiest way to get to it. Edit, set driven key. There we go. This box pops up. So we have a driver and driven. Okay, the driver is what's controlling it, what's driving the action, and the driven is what's going to happen as a result of it. So I'm going to load this sphere as both items. Okay, so I just grab the sphere, load the driver, load the driven. The driver, the controlling object, is going to be that translate Y. As the translate Y moves up, it's going to control those scales doing different things. So I'm going to grab all the scales because all the scales are going to be driven. So I'm going to say right now when the translate Y is at 0, you be just like you are. Hit a key. Then as the translate Y gets to, let's say, 5, I want the scales to be like this and like that. Hit another key. When the translate Y is at 10, then this will be out, this will be down. We'll hit another key. When the translate Y is at 15, we'll just set all these back to 1. Okay? So now as I grab this and move it, you can see how it's morphing through all these different stages to get to that. Okay, so it's very neat in how this tool works because you can really do some complex animations with this kind of setup. We can actually control 25, 30, 40, 50 different things all with one controller doing one knob. One item will move the entire setup. If I jump to, oops, I gotta find my Andy. When I jump to one of my rigs, and even I guess the skeleton thing would work too. Control, create control rig. There we go. So this is a default skeleton pose rig type thing. If you're animating a character, you can start with something like this, and these are essentially all the bones that would go inside the character. And then based on all the other stuff that you want to have set up, you can play with more controls on here as to what you want to happen. And you can see how I can control each one of these specific items. Oops, on this hand. I can just grab this, shift click, shift click, shift click, and see how I can grab each one of these and rotate these individually. I can also go back to my controls. There we go. Source, stance, control rig. And it will come in with, there it is, some default settings or setups on here for us to control this character. Okay? So if I were to go to here, It has a bunch of different items that are inside this area. All of these are done with set driven. Okay, so all the stuff to get that to do what it's supposed to do is done with set driven. All of these things are done with different kinds of rigging setups, allowing us to scrunch the hand together. But at the backbone of all of this is set driven. Set driven is driving a lot of these things to control all this stuff happening. What happened to my Andy rig? Might have died. And on here, this is all the different controls. And it's kind of neat how they have this thing set up. Go back here. They have this, so I can grab this and move the entire thing around. Move this around. Control where the knees are at. Grab these things. Some of these will have controls on them. Other ones will also. Oh, those are my stuffs. Okay, so set driven is kind of driving those things. So even though we're not going to get into this kind of level rigging, all of the stuff that we're doing is used from the smallest little rig that we do to most advanced rig that we do. Think of rigging something enormous. Vertical. So this was one of my ex-students. This was their first assignment after they graduated and they got a job. They said, we need you to animate this convertible top actually working. I need you to go through and look at all the mechanics, look at all the gears, look at all the screws and pins and everything, and figure out how this thing moves, and then to get it so that we could animate this thing closing and animating it open up. Sure, we could do that one time if we grabbed all the stuff and set a key and then put everything back in position. But what's easier is if you had a slider, one controller that would open it up and then close it. And that's what set driven can do. Okay, it's not like a magic thing, it's an awesome tool. Oh, I know what happened. I downloaded it, then I deleted it. Dang it. No, he isn't. It's right there. I spelled it wrong. That's right, wrong. Alright, so I'm going to drop the Andy rig inside here. Because the Andy rig is like one of the most advanced rigs that they've had. The guy who created it went to Savannah College of Art and Design, and he worked on it as like his senior project. That's what he did pretty much his entire senior year, is to build this rig so that you could animate it and move it around. Yeah. And it's like one of the most popular rigs around. If you go to YouTube while we're waiting. Yeah. And we look up the animation mentor reel. A lot of these rigs you'll find they've used the Andy rig at some point inside of theirs, or they've used this one as another popular one. That's a modification of it. That's another popular one there. And there's the Andy rig, all of the glory of the Andy rig. It's still loading? It can't be loading. It's freezing is what it's doing. They wanted the Blake rig to be able to change the skin tone, the hairstyle, the facial hair, the hair color, the eye color. Those are basically, you click on it and say I want this, and there's an expression or a set driven or a whatever that's turning things on and off in the background. And that's how the Blake rig is working with these kinds of things. And so you see as he goes through and kind of switches some of these items around, there's his bow tie, there's his pattern. And all he's doing in this case is just turning things on and off and changing textures. That's all at this point he's been doing. Adding sunglasses. Okay, now here's all the facial control. So for every single piece of facial control on here, there's a bunch of stuff that goes into making the face work correctly. It's not like you can just say blink and he'll know how to blink. We have to set up what does a closed blinky eye look like, what does an open blinky eye look like, and then make controls to go between the two items. Now when you look at something like this, it becomes very overwhelming. There's like so many things going on. When they look at Pixar animation and you look at like what they do on each character, they go through every single frame and set keyframes and nearly every control just to make sure that it's exactly what they want it to look like. So they'll go through and tweak every single one of these to make that expression read as best it can. Get into some hand movement. There's the shoulder blades. Obviously for stuff like this, you really have to understand how the human body works. Because if you don't know how your arms move, it can come off looking very weird. See all the controls for the feet? There's heel, peel, toe tap, ankle pivot, toe pivot, ball swivel, round knee, stretch. Is Andy unfrozen? No, Andy's still frozen. So we're going to abandon Andy for now. But there's a bunch of rigs online. There's also an Elvis rig, which is pretty neat. Maya rig. How to rig in Maya. Nope. Thought they had a video for him. Maybe it got moved. Librarian rig. Here's another popular one. You can change a bunch of stuff on him. There's the... I can't think of his name. Bloke? I think that's what it is. So on Creative Crash, this is where you can get a lot of the rigs. They have some ones you can pay, like the Batman rig is a pay one. The person who made it wants to actually make money selling their rigs, and that's what they do. But there's other people like the Andy rig, freeware. And we'll sort by, not uploaded, download. Their titles are off, okay? So there's the Andy rig, the #1 downloaded rig. This one is free because the guy who did this, he wants to get into rigging. So he makes his rig free. People can use it. It gets really popular. But you can do all of this kind of thing with the Andy rig, which is pretty neat. And then here is Sergio. Here is Tiny, Ollie, Package Man. And some of these have been around for years. Like this is, I'm trying to think, like 2007? I thought it was before that. Maybe it was just released in 2007, but he's been around for a long time. So all these things have different rigs, different ways that these things have been set up. All these are very human-like. There's also some robotic rigs, and those ones are rigged differently. There's also stuff like the Devil, who has wings, and the Devil stuff is rigged differently because he has wings. There's Moon, there's a monkey. The monkey has a tail, which is kind of neat. There's a flour sack. This is like a traditional animation thing. If you're trying to animate something just really organically, you would animate a flour sack. So someone made that. There's a Miranda. Where's that robot at? There's a car. So even cars have rigs. Transformer. And it actually transforms what it looks like. Bad ratings though. So probably a horrible rig. Some of the rigs are not good. People just download them because they look like they're going to be good, but they're actually not. There's a librarian. Here's Bork. Okay, so there's lots of different rigs that are out there. They all fundamentally work on these same principles that we're learning for the fish, and the same principles we're learning for the mech thing. Okay? Oh, there's Andy. Alright, so all of these things here that you're seeing are all different set-driven type things that they've created in order to control what Andy's doing. So for like the fingers, each one of these things is a controller that controls how Andy rotates her fingers. Okay, so it's a lot of work that goes into doing this. We don't have time to do an entire character like this, so we're focusing in on those key fundamental things that you would carry over into all of the other stuff. All right, so as you work on your fish, just keep in mind that you can't just like do these, follow the lecture, and then be done with it. Make sure you're understanding it. Make sure you're going through set driven, and make sure you understand how set driven works. Make sure you understand how the connection generator works. Make sure you understand how expressions work, okay? Because all of these things will carry over into the next assignment. And then if you ever get a job doing this stuff, it becomes a really big, helpful, handy thing to know all of these kinds of things. Even if you do motion graphics, all the rigging stuff we do in 3D would carry over into motion graphics stuff because you rig and motion graphics type stuff. Okay? So that's all I'm going to have today for the rigging stuff. All the stuff is on the canvas, so once you're done modeling, once you're done texturing, then you're actually going to start rigging the fish and then start animating your pool of fish. Okay? Alrighty.